Hello, everyone, and welcome to another reading, I guess I could call this. I've done this a couple times on the channel where they have released a short story, kind of, having to do with or leading into events that was going to be going on in the game. And I went ahead and read them so we could get a little bit of extra lore in regards to what was going on leading up into the main story. There was one I read about Lorthamar and Thalysra, where you could tell that they had a romance blooming between the two of them. And there was another about the Death Knights, specifically the Four Horsemen, basically debating on whether or not, they were going to stay loyal to Bolvar, whether or not, what they were going to do. And then, of course, the fight between him and Sylvanas happens, and we got to see it from the perspective of the Four Horsemen, which explained why we then saw the four of them kind of in action at the very beginning. Well, this one apparently, from what I briefly understand, obviously this has to do with Rathian, because he's literally on the cover here. And from what I understand, this also has to do with, I guess, him attending the wedding of Lorthamar and Thalysra, I think. Like, the description seemed to implicate that he was attending a wedding, and I don't know, something involving Rathian. And the only wedding I can think of is Lorthamar and Thalysra. We'll find out, I guess, as I read this. So I've gotten good feedback on these readings in the past, so I very much hope you guys enjoy. I will try to do my best to kind of emulate the voices. I don't necessarily promise that I will be able to do it all that well. It's something that I have worked on over time, so forgive me if I either mess up on who is talking and not doing the right voice, or just simply not doing their voice correctly. I try my best, but I can't always promise that it's going to be fantastic. So anyways, this is called The Vow Eternal. There's 5 pages of text here. And it's by Christy Golden. I'm sure plenty of you know exactly who that is. You can even get a PDF version of this if you wanted to. So, anyways. Rathian's heart ached with grief and flamed with fury. Splotches of deep crimson soaked into the golden sand as those who bled slipped into timelessness. Everything was timeless here in the caverns. And it was what the caverns sheltered that the fallen dragons of Azeroth had died to defend. Rathian, Earthwarder, aspect of the Black Dragonflight, turned sand to glass with the magma he breathed. His loyal flight, a dancing wave of gleaming ebony scales, followed him, weaving between the swirling pillars of sand to fight back against the tide of infinite darkness. All were as free as he was from the madness that had cursed the first aspect of Earth, Neltharion, otherwise known as Deathwing. He was gone forever. He lived solely as a distant memory, his only ability to harm in the recollection of his wicked deeds. Rathian led the Black Dragonflight now, battling to protect Azeroth alongside the 4 other flights, Blue, Green, Red, and Bronze. They were united in purpose at long last. Then it came, as it always did, the shadow falling upon them, upon him. No, I must not look up. But no sooner did he think it, than he began to twist and shriek. Metal plating spread over him, containing him, as he contorted into a form less of solid flesh than of liquid fire. When the horrifying transformation was complete, the monster he had become, fueled by hatred and rage, opened its massive iron jaws. "There is no Rathian," the thing of metal and magma cried. The voice was dreadful, heart-stopping, and familiar. "There is only I, Deathwing, now and always," Rathian found himself hissing. But it was not his mouth. He watched helpless as the aspects swooped to attack him, as the black dragons doubled back to blast him. Their old enemy made anew. All they saw was Deathwing. All Rathian saw were the blazing streams of dragonfire hurtling towards him. All he heard was his own voice bellowing, "You are my legacy. You shall never escape my shadow." Fire filling his vision, the heat, the brightness. "I'll never be you!" Rathian bolted upright, his throat raw from the shout. It took him a long moment to realize he was not in the timeways, under attack by his own kind. He was safe in a comfortable bed at the Summer's Rest Inn in Pandaria. He reoriented himself, taking slow, deep breaths, and focused on his surroundings. Hold on. Sorry, guys. Forgot to do that. He noted the maps affixed to the walls, the chairs draped with crusty, mud-stained garb, the lacquered table obscured by empty bottles and sheaves of notes from his travels. Among the detritus sat a scroll, neatly rolled and stamped with not one, but 2 wax seals. There was a soft knock on the door. Rathian quickly composed himself, shrugging into an embroidered robe, then running his fingers through his thick shock of black hair. No doubt the Pandaren at the door had heard his nightmare-spurned shout, but he would be damned if he ever admitted to it. "Come in," his voice had its usually silky timbre. Miphan entered, bearing a tray heaped with local delicacies. They both pretended nothing at all, had happened as she cleared a space on the cluttered table and set down the laden tray. The raw terror of the dream still lingered, but Rathian's stomach growled as he surveyed the rice cakes, tea, and buns. Food was good, grounding even. "May I bring you anything else?" Rathian forced a smile. "No, that will be all," he said, then added, "Actually, Miphan, might you bring by my lunch later? I think I shall stay in and be a lazy layabout for a change." He pretended not to notice Miphan's eyes darting to all the empty wine bottles. "I am honored to serve such an esteemed guest. If you wish for anything else—" Yes, ring the bell, I know. Thank you." He waved his hand in a shooing gesture, and Miphan, not intimidated in the least, bowed and closed the door behind her. Rathian let out a sigh, and then selected a rice cake, pointedly ignoring the scroll's silent condemnation. As he ate, the remaining shreds of the recurring dream dispersed. But questions remained. Could he avoid following in Deathwing's dark footsteps? Shake the shadow? Or was it possible that Rathian would one day succumb to that shadow? I mean, if you guys remember, we actually kind of got a glimpse of this in Nyalotha. Remember that first boss fight? A dull ache in his chest pulled him from his uneasy thoughts. It was constant, this melancholy that had been plaguing him of late. For years, Rathian had been researching the mysterious place known as the Dragon Isles. It was no legend, though it very well might have been. The famous wandering isle of Pandaria had nothing on these isles when it came to elusiveness. Rathian had sought intel, to no avail. The things he had done, the places he had gone, the deals he had made, so much effort for so few answers. Most of the people he interrogated knew nothing, and many of those who did know something appeared to be disinclined to reveal more than a few bits and bobs of highly useless information. Vexing. Speaking of vexing, his gaze fell upon the scroll once more. It sat there, taunting him. With a growl, he snatched it up and unfurled it. First Arcanist Thalysra and Regent Lord Lorthamar Theron request the pleasure of your company as they join hearts, hands, and souls at the Lunastra estate. Formal attire requested. I really, really wish this had been in the game. Don't tell me that there aren't players that would not have loved to have actually attended this event. Anyways, Rathian scoffed. The pleasure of your company? Ha! This wedding was a monumental event in Azeroth's history, the joining of two powerful leaders, and yet he knew he had been invited only as a courtesy. No one in Azeroth really wanted a black dragon, especially him, at any sort of grand occasion. It was good political theater to trot out someone so instrumental in defeating the old god N'Zoth and saving the world, but neither the couple nor their high-profile guests would deem being in his company a pleasure. Rathian crumbled the scroll with unnecessary vigor and flung it into a corner. Weddings were notoriously sappy affairs, and this one was likely to be especially so. According to the reports of his Black Talon operatives, it was a true love match, one that had been blazed to a flame during a poetry competition of all things. That's the story I read for you guys. There would be other giggling, happy pairs, families with their giddy children, old friends reuniting. Positively stomach-churning. Rathian arrived at the Lunastra estate with the wedding ceremony in full swing. He had hoped his attendance would provide him a reprieve from both his nagging nightmare thoughts and his fruitless search for the Dragon Isles, and also offer the chance for him to be seen. After all, he deserved to be there, showing face amongst the who's who of Azeroth, especially if he was going to become aspect of the Dragonflight one day. Presently, all eyes were on the wedding party. With his keen dragon eyes, Rathian could see the lingering magic of the dome that once encased Suramar. Its faint curve and the fell-ravaged area that it had stalwartly held at bay were testimony to all the Nightborn had endured. Rathian turned his attention to Lady Liadrin, the fire-haired leader of the Blood Knights, who was officiating for the Lysra and Lorthamar. Ooh! Sorry, I also love Liadrin too. The lovebirds standing before her were, Rathian had to admit, gorgeous. Lorthamar was almost unrecognizable, for Rathian had never seen him wearing anything other than armor and a stern expression. Knowing the history of his people, Rathian could not blame him for either. Now, the leader of the Blood Elves was clad in colorful draped fabric and smiling gently, the warrior within yielding to the lover. While Lorthamar wore no giddy grin, still he was softer and seemed lit from within by a quiet joy. The Lysra made no attempt to conceal her happiness, and her smile was full and free. Why wouldn't it be? Rathian thought. The whole place was aglow with people from near and afar. Standing with the bride were her advisors and former comrades in arms in the Nightfallen Rebellion. Rathian spotted Arcanist Valtois, Lilith Lunastra, and Silgrin, and his owl Cal. Theron's closest friend, Ranger General Haldurin Brightwing, beamed while Grand Magister Romath wore robes and a rare smile. Among the attendees, the variety was even more evident. Thrall, former leader of the Horde, and now a member of the Horde Council, had brought his family, his wife, Agrelon, and their 2 children, Durak and Reza. I think it's the first time they've actually name-dropped the second of Thrall's kids. We knew about Durak. We actually saw him in Legion. But that's the first time I've heard the name of the second child. The youngsters were well behaved, Rathian supposed, though he knew very little about children. Well, nothing at all, really, and he had no desire to start learning now. He took in Queen Talanji, who had made the trek from Zandalar, bringing along Zakan, another younger guest. Rokan, leader of the Darkspear Trolls, stood with them. There was High Chieftain Bane Bloodhoof, who Rathian observed with a sly grin, came with Mela Highmountain. Lillian Voss had accompanied Kalia Menethil, erstwhile Princess of Lordaeron, and now part of the Forsaken Desolate Council. Beside her was her champion, Derek Proudmoore. In the past, Rathian had sought to protect Azeroth by pitting Horde and Alliance against one another in order to determine which side was the mightier. Now, he understood that the fate of the world hung not on conquest, but on collaboration. Looking out over the captivated congregation, he was proud of the Horde, of Lorthamar and Thalysra, who had invited the Alliance. and he respected those of the Alliance who had accepted their invitation, from Lord Commander Turallion, Regent of Stormwind and Protector of the Alliance, his partner Illyria, and their half-elf son Eretor, to Matthias Shaw, who was no doubt keeping an eye on the leader of the Alliance at a Horde wedding, Anduin, the King of Stormwind, who had been absent from that role over the past few years, had always believed permanent peace was possible between the two factions. He had worked towards that goal with a quiet tenacity that Rathian had admired. After the Fourth War, Anduin's hope had become a cautious reality. Sorry, I was making sure I had that to scroll down. Whereas Rathian's hope had been twisted and thrust at him in the form of that dark dream. Lorthamar's voice cut through Rathian's brooding. He was reciting his vows in poem form. My beloved Thalyssra, the gift of sorrow is the blessing of joy. I cannot replicate Gideon Emery's amazing voice. I'm sorry. I try, but his voice is just so great. I can't really replicate it. I tried in that other short story, but man, his voice is so deep and distinguished, you know? The gift of burden is its release. The gift of the storm is the clear sky. From this moment, I pledge to be at your side through both sorrow and joy. I pledge to share your burdens. I pledge to weather the storms with you and embrace with a full heart the brightness of the stars. Rathian had not known a place so full of people could be so still. Thalyssra's tears slid like liquid crystal along the lavender of her cheeks as she spoke with a voice soft with emotion but clear, her hands clasping her soon-to-be husband's hands. Lorthamar, my heart, the years ere now echo with regret I had not understood till this moment. I did not know how I longed till you were there to assuage my longing. My world is painted with bursting color, the palette of dreams once hidden, now manifested. Let us craft with word and deed, with mind, body, and heart, this new existence where two are one, now and forever, and beyond forever. I shall love you. Rathian should not have been surprised that their vows were in verse. It had sealed their love and would always be the language of their hearts. His own heart surged suddenly with that peculiar ache, and he rubbed his chest, hoping to massage it away. Before all gathered here, and before the holy light itself, Lady Liadrin said, I confirm with these words, Thalyssra and Lorthamar have entwined their lives, their fates, and their hearts. She grinned. May love and light ever shine upon you both. Then Lorthamar lifted his face, and Thalyssra lowered hers, and as their lips met and their arms went around each other, cheers, applause, and raucous whoops went up. Rathian had wished to congratulate the newlyweds and take his leave, but they had not even finished descending the steps of the dais before guests clustered around them. He rolled his eyes. I shall wander about until the happy couple is less besieged. Once more, his presence did not go without notice as he maneuvered through the crowd with his chest puffed out and chin held high, as was fitting for a future aspect. The glances of awe and admiration from onlookers pleased him, easing the ache in his chest and putting his old confidence back in his step. He had practically walked the span of Azeroth on a journey of self-discovery, studying the world and learning all he could about her people. Fought beside the world's greatest heroes, even against his own kind, to protect Azeroth. Surely he had done enough to prove he was not anything like Deathwing. He surprised himself at the jollying sensation of being drawn into the atmosphere. By the time he reached a busy bar area, he was feeling more like himself. And there, not only could he enjoy a beverage, but also perhaps overhear interesting tidbits. Something told him this would be a fruitful endeavor. What was it the goblin said? Jackpot. As he waited for a much-desired glass of arc wine, he sidled up alongside Talia Fordragon of Coltiras. She was speaking with the former blue dragon aspect, Caligos, who was in his visage of a half-elf with a hand on his chest as if in a pledge. Rathian noted he looked a bit sad. "The Lord Admiral is doing well," Talia told Calgos. "Lady Jaina wanted so much to be here, but her hands are rather full. We're having some trouble with pirates." "Pirates? Again?" interrupted Flynn Fairwind, Talia's friend. "Nasty business. What flags are they flying? Might be old mates of mine. If so, I'll tell you all their tricks." Calic offered Flynn a polite chuckle. "He's not joking," asserted Matthias Shaw in a deadpan voice. Flynn smiled happily at him, and Shaw's lip twitched beneath his mustache. Was that a smile? Rathian thought the old adage, opposites attract, was certainly true with this pair. Flynn was a reformed pirate, and Shaw led Stormwind's SI-7, a covert intelligence agency. Yet here they were, a happy couple among other happy couples. Did no one else come alone? "Rathian," Calic said warmly. "I'm glad you had decided to attend." Not attending was never even a thought. Rathian took his glass of arc wine and raised it celebratorily. "It would be a shame to miss the chance to enjoy such fine arc wine, and fine company." Talia's eyes widened, and she took a step towards him. "I am honored to meet you. I hear the world owes you a great thanks." Rathian gave a benevolent nod. "I serve Azeroth gladly in any way I can. As do we all," he added graciously, gesturing to the sea of guests. "Talia?" Derek Proudmoore approached with Kalia and Lillian, and doffed his hat. "It is so good to see you, though I do wish my dear sister had been able to attend." Rathian could not help his mouth from hanging just the slightest bit open in disbelief as Talia welcomed all three warmly. Here was Jaina's brother, a Forsaken, who was accepted by his family and former compatriots. Even so, he stayed close to Kalia. "In theory, he has enemies on all sides," Rathian mused, "but he also has family, blood or found, on all sides too." Rathian realized perhaps he was a touch jealous. Rathian took note of who else was not in attendance. "I cannot help but notice that there are no night elves present." "Why am I not surprised?" he shared airily. His talents had informed him that Tyrande and Malfurion were still smarting after what they viewed as mistreatment at the hands of the Alliance during the war. Rathian had also learned that the Kaldari were preoccupied with a new development. He did not know the nature of the endeavor, yet. Talia glanced around. "I'm sure the Night Elves were invited." "Probably not after what happened in Suramar." "I'm sure." Rathian took a slow sip of his arc wine. "I do spy Queen Mia." The queen had come in her husband's stead, a wise decision since King Greymane was said to have held on to his hatred of the Horde. Furthermore, the petite convivial, had taken me a moment to realize what that word, convivial, Mia warmed hearts with her mere presence, mixing kindness with a cheerful practicality. She was filling a plate with Suramarian delicacies at a nearby banquet table. The Forsaken delegation exchanged uncomfortable glances. "It was a pleasure to see the Queen again," Kalia said diplomatically. Rathian watched as Mia struck up a conversation with Illyria Windrunner. She whispered something to the ranger, and Illyria burst into laughter. Rathian raised an eyebrow. Illyria was always serious. Both she and Turalian, who was talking with Talanji in front of the towering lavender-frosted wedding cake. The listener had thoughtfully placed it on a small cart which would be wheeled to various areas so everyone could see it in its unsliced magnificence. Rathian noted that Turalian seemed oddly relaxed in the heart of Horde territory. The Black Dragon averted his gaze, thinking their behavior spoke volumes about the changes the past 5 years had brought, and it dawned on him. His loyal spies who kept him up to date had informed him that there had long been tension between the two. Rathian supposed 1,000 years of war could do that to a couple. But it appeared that the light-infused paladin and the void-touched elf had rekindled what had been a legendary romance. Rathian, Calix was regarding him curiously. "Are you all right?" Never better, Rathian lied. He lifted his glass to the assemblage and gave a bow. You'll pardon me, I think I see Magni glinting over there. I should say hello. He had indeed seen Magni glinting. He glinted frequently, sometimes blindingly. Fortunately, the soft twilight of Suramar did not create too fierce a glitter. The former dwarven king had once attempted a ritual, right before Deathwing had erupted from the earth, wreaking destruction and death, to speak with Azeroth itself. It had worked, with caveats. While Magni was now the speaker of Azeroth, he had been turned into solid diamond. It did not seem to bother him or his family. Magni, his brothers, and his daughter were roaring with laughter with the young troll Zakan, who looked at him in admiration. Rathian spread out his arms and he strode towards them. Magni! He cried, genuinely glad to have spotted him, for the two had worked together to defeat N'Zoth. Oh, Rathian! Come here, laddie, and let me introduce you to my family. My brothers Mirrodin and Bronn, and my dear daughter Moira. I, of course, know all your names, Rathian said with a dashing wink. It was true. And what a pleasure to finally meet you, he added, taking in the lively bunch. Oh, we know about you too, Moira said. Me da here will not shut up. Rathian was caught off guard. Such a warm welcome almost undid him. The feeling was contagious. Magni unwittingly came to the rescue. We Bronzebeard boys have just returned from exploring Northrend, and who should ever hear us talking about young Zakano here? Zakan was almost incandescent with delight. I am proud to meet you, Zakan, but I think there may be another whom I've yet to meet. Moira, did the future Emperor accompany you today? Aye, though I had to pull his nose out of a book, she said. I'm glad I did. Look over there. According to reports, through his talons, Daegrin II, the child of a Bronzebeard princess and a Dark Iron Emperor, was heir presumptive to both thrones. His physical appearance embodied traits of both parents. Skin, a warm shade of gray with green eyes. Rathian had been told that one could see the occasional glimmer of a fiery red in them. Daegrin's long white hair was pulled back in a tiny braid. By the way, I believe this is one of the first actual references and acknowledgments of Daegrin here, possibly since Cataclysm, because we only have seen him as a baby near Moira in in the capital city of the dwarves, in the throne room. That's the only place we've ever actually seen him. We haven't seen him as a kid, and he hasn't gotten an updated model or anything. According to the game, he's still a baby. But here we're actually addressing, no, he's actually growing up into a young man. So I just wanted to acknowledge that, by the way. Where was I? And his gawky frame was dressed in elegant formal garb, which he had likely ruined by sitting on the grass beneath a tree. Eretor sat beside him, and they chatted amicably as Eretor flipped through a large tome, perhaps the one Moira had needed Daegrin to put down, and the dwarven boy examined a beautiful ceremonial dagger that Eretor had worn to the wedding. Daegrin is me heart made flesh again, Magni said softly, and yon Eretor's a good lad. A kind one. Growing up, Daegrin didn't have many friends. Rathian understood not having many friends, or any friends. He had never truly been a child. He had grown so swiftly and been driven by so dark a purpose that there had been no time to play. Of course, a childhood disrupted by wars and conflicts didn't help. Meeting Anduin in Pandaria had been both a gift and a curse. A gift because Rathian had learned that anyone might deem him worth caring for. A curse because Rathian had chosen to exploit Anduin's trust in an ill-conceived attempt to protect Azeroth. They had met again years later, and that encounter had been, well, suffice it to say, Anduin had a much better right cross than Rathian had given him credit for. He hoped that they could reconcile once Anduin returned from wherever he was. Rathian drained his glass, and then the strange ache in his chest returned. You are my legacy. You shall never escape my shadow. Would you like to meet him? Moira's question made the black dragon start. They seemed Tent, I think I'll stretch my legs a bit. A pleasure meeting you. Over yonder was a serene pond. He was not sure if it was the Arkwine, the number of guests hemming in around him, or the ache, but he decided he would walk for a bit, then go. I should not have come. Let my spies gather what I need to do what? He would never find the Dragon Isles. He would never be able to make and keep a true friend, inspire troops, or taste the type of joy that Lorthamar and Thalyssra had found. Or the Bronzebeards. Eyes fixed on the pond, he strode quickly towards it, stopping with a growl when a warm, rumbling voice called out to him. Let me see ahead, see who it is that's calling out to him here. Oh, I guess it's Bane and Mela.
"Ah, Rathian! There you are!"
Rathian closed his eyes and then turned with a forced smile. Bane! Mela! The traveling cake had reached this area, and as a servant passed by, Rathian helped himself to another glass of Arkwine. He could use it.
"I am surprised, and pleased to see you chose to attend,"
Bane said. Yes, well, the guest list called for Azeroth's best and brightest. They laughed. He drank. Mela slipped her arm into Bane's, and the High Chieftain covered it. Rathian had to fight the impulse to dash his glass to the ground. He had expected the wedding would be, well, a wedding, but it was so much more. And everywhere, this inescapable sense of belonging and love and connection, like some sort of cheerful blight rising to engulf everyone and smother them with cozy contentment. Everyone, of course, except for him. Him and that Tauren over there. He was black-furred with white markings on his muzzle. He was not dressed formally, as the invitation had requested, but wore shamanic robes and held a staff. And he was staring directly at them. "Ah, your pardon, chieftain," Rathian said to Bane, keeping his eyes on the stranger, "but is that sullen-looking fellow a friend of yours?" Bane followed his gaze and frowned.
"Kurog, one of Magatha's Grim Totem."
He all but spat the words. Bane had every reason for his vehemence. Rathian had learned through his spies that Magatha Grim Totem had secretly poisoned the weapon that killed Bane's father, Cairn, turning a scratch into a death sentence and instigating a coup. Thunderbluff soon returned to Bloodhoof hands, and Bane had shown mercy and merely exiled the Grim Totem. But clearly bad blood still lingered. Very bad blood, if the expression on the interloper's face was any indication. Kurog strode towards them.
"Thalyssra and Lorthamar have sullied themselves by inviting dragons, let alone a black dragon," the shaman said. "The most unnatural of them all."
Why a shaman would know so much about black dragons, Rathian did not know. Hearing it made his hand holding the cup of Arkwine tremble, but for an instant. Metal plating, clamping down, forcing magma to retain a form. Rathian took a stealing breath, reining it in. He would play the part of a future aspect, not a monster. A smile alighted on his face, and he gave a courteous bow, taking note of the many heads staring to turn their way. Was this where the show ended?
"You should not be here," Bane stated. "I have the same right to be here as you," Kurog retorted.
Rathian held his tongue.
"I am a shaman. Kurog continued. "The entire earth is mine to walk."
I doubt that very much." Rathian's voice was smooth as glass. "The Nightborn have suffered far too much to protect Suramar, to let riffraff like you saunter in. Where is your invitation, by the way?" Rathian's was in his pouch, albeit wrinkled from his earlier ire. "Who admitted you? No matter. I will very gladly escort you out before anyone else takes notice of you making a silly fool of yourself." Rathian could hear the onlookers watching quietly. Let them watch. Kurog kept going, scrutinizing him.
"How were you made, Rathian? Cobbled together out of pieces of corpses? You and your depraved kin, you are the very symbol of all that has gone wrong in this world."
While most onlookers murmured in shock at Kurog's words, Rathian heard a voice from deep in the crowd cheering the Tauren on. A chill ran through Rathian, but not from the voice of dissent in the crowd, rather from the peculiarity that a shaman would know this bit of awfully specific information. He wondered if he was the reason the Tauren had decided to show up. Kura gave a leering smile. It was ugly and cruel and filled with glee at Rathian's discomfiture.
You could save Azeroth 1,000 times and still never be a natural part of it. You are an outcast. You will never remove the reek of who you are.
A skeleton of iron and not of bones, the rage burning hotter than the fire. There was a snap. Pain blossomed in Rathian's hand from the broken shards of the arcwine glass that he had crushed. He ignored it and lunged forward, seizing the shaman's robe and lifting the enormous Tauren as if he weighed nothing. I could incinerate you in half a heartbeat, Rathian snarled, his voice harsh and deep and unfamiliar. He pressed on, shaking the shaman. With a single sweep of my claws, your lifeblood would flow into the sands of time, stained with the blood of so many. The blasts of magma, my own dragonflight coming for me, and the shadow. Always the shadow. Rathian felt a hand on his arm, and Kalik was there. It took every bit of control Rathian had not to turn on him too. Let him go. Now, the blue dragon said calmly. Rathian took great heaving breaths before shoving Kurag away. The shaman staggered, crashing into the cart supporting the fount-inspired wedding cake. The cart tipped over before the appalled server could react, and the great beautiful pillar of a cake toppled to the paved stone. Kurag righted himself with his staff and crowd, looking ready to charge. Some onlookers shouted in concern for Rathian, others in support of Kurag. Kalik sought to place a reassuring hand on Rathian's shoulder, but this time the black dragon shrugged him off. Rathian's red eyes narrowed to angry slits as he prepared to rush the Tauren. Stop! The Lysra's voice, usually warm and modulated, cracked like a whip. Rathian froze, along with Kurag. What has happened here? The first Arcanist was controlled despite her fury. Her hands were glowing with power so palpable that Rathian could almost smell it. She surveyed the crowd and then her ruined wedding cake. Rathian started to speak. This grim totem, Mela interrupted, her voice as steely as the Lysra's, has trespassed onto your lands and intruded on your celebration solely to harass your guests. The Lysra turned to Kurag, evaluating the brute. I shall grant you more courtesy than you showed me, Tauren, and allow you to leave on your own 2 feet. Go, before I change my mind. The pulsing magic wreathing her hands had not wavered for an instant. There were 2 types of aggressors, Rathian knew. Those who wilted like a flower before sunfall, and those who, despite all warnings, could not resist a last swipe. Kurag was clearly the latter as he spat at Rathian's feet. He gazed out at the crowd smugly.
Soon you will all know the true power of the Tauren.
Then he bowed in mock courtesy at the Lysra, eyed Bane and Mela with contempt, and turned to depart. Bane and the others looked just as puzzled by the Tauren's warning as Rathian felt. The Lysra nodded to Silgrin, who wordlessly moved to follow. The spell fencer would ensure that Kurag would not get lost on his way out. Rathian registered that several of the bystanders were glaring at the shaman and offering Rathian awkward smiles in support. Others smirked at him. Their faces showed poorly concealed loathing. His sharp ears caught the cruel, ugly words that they thought Rathian could not hear. And another voice, this one in his head.
You are my legacy. You shall never escape my shadow.
Rathian straightened, gazing from the cake to his hands. The rage had spent itself, and the other pain, somehow worse than anger, was making itself known again. Heat rose in Rathian's face, and he silently cursed his lack of control. Composing himself, he spoke. I regret not expressing myself in a more civilized fashion. Doing what he could to recover the dignity that he had torn to shreds, Rathian forced himself to look at Thalyssra and Lorthamar. I am sorry for causing such an incident. There is no need to apologize, Lorthamar said with a twinkle in his eye. The bakers have made many more cakes where that came from. We regret that our security was insufficient, Thalyssra added. None of our guests should have been exposed to such vitriol. You're very kind, but I should have realized that my presence here would be provocative to some. I hope this did not tarnish your memories of this most joyful occasion. I must depart, and I wish you both nothing but happiness for all your days. They did not protest. I owe you my thanks, Bane chimed in. Kurog is a powerful shaman. Rathian held up a hand, flashing a charming smile. No need for thanks, the black dragon bowed, straightened his shoulders, and strode off without another word. Rathian did not know the identities of the towering twin statues in the vineyard. They were Nightborn holding aloft standards. The standard frames were topped with a carved crescent moon that proved a comfortable surface, and that was all he needed to know. He lay cradled in one, his legs crossed at the ankles and hands laced behind his head. He was deeply tired and a bit drunk. Between the dead-end search for the Dragon Isles and the harrowing dream that continually shattered his sleep, his endurance had all been drained. Add the haunting twinge in his chest wearing him down in his waking hours, and one could start to see why he had taken to consuming so much wine of late. The disaster of a day had done nothing but reinforce every brooding thought he held about himself. So many in the crowd had moved so swiftly to derision. He was quick to anger, and he was not fit to lead. Not when he had threatened Kurog with such violence over nothing but words. Even now, Rathian felt the shadow of Deathwing upon him. Foolish to have hoped for anything else. His dark reverie was broken by a voice calling his name. He ignored it. Rathian! The voice called again. Sighing, the black dragon peered down. Like himself, the other dragon was still in his visage, which was as striking as his true form. Kalagos, what do you wish of me? The blue dragon lifted a bottle of arc wine and 2 glasses. Some help in drinking this fine vintage. Not such a bad idea. The wedding had been an escape from his mounting uneasiness. More arc wine would perhaps do the trick. Rathian leaped from his makeshift perch, shifting into his true shape, and reassuming his visage after landing. My company will likely not be pleasant, Rathian said as he accepted the glass Calic offered, recalling the overly optimistic wording of the invitation, but you are welcome to it. Calic looked at him with compassion as they wandered towards a bench and sat. You are not at fault, Rathian. You were invited. The Grim Totem was not. He came only to cause trouble, and unfortunately he succeeded. The Tauren are a great and kind people. He filled Rathian's glass. Most of them, at least. There are exceptions to everything, of course. Save for black dragons, it would seem, Rathian replied. Hatred of my flight seems fairly unanimous, don't you think? Even I felt it necessary to thin their ranks. He thought of the looks on some of the wedding guests' faces before he'd left. The fear, the disgust, the voice of Deathwing in his mind. Kurog was not alone in his revulsion. You played a major role in defeating N'Zoth, and major roles in far less savory events. He took a sip. In fact, give me a second. I should probably take a sip of water myself, considering how these readings can kind of get to your throat. Much better. Now, where were we? The wine was sweet and heady. I wish I hadn't come. I'm sure Lorthamar and Thalysra would agree. Calic mildly took a sip of his own mark wine. I, for one, think they made it clear that they are furious someone trespassed and insulted a few of their honored guests. A humorous smile quirked one corner of Rathian's mouth. Perhaps, but if so, it is only because they, and you, are exceptionally kind and open-minded. The rest, well, we black dragons are cautionary tales. Calic pressed his lips together and then sighed. It can be difficult for others to trust your flight, he said quietly. I know a bit about how that feels. I also know we will likely never discover if Neltharion embraced the madness of the old gods by choice. Rathian looked away. He did not want to show how deeply the words resonated. It's possible he was a victim of their influence and did not wish for his fate, Calic continued, adding after a moment, just as Malagos did not wish for the pain that twisted in his own mind and spirit to cruelty. Rathian rarely flinched. He did not do so now, but he felt the impulse. He had been told that the original aspect of the Blue Dragonflight had once been warm, humorous, and kind. Much, he thought, like Caligos. But when nearly all his flight had been slaughtered, the blue aspect's mind had been lost to grief for eons. When he recovered, Malagos was so greatly changed that he attempted to exterminate any mortals who dared use magic. In the end, his own kin had no choice but to attack and slay him, with the help of Azeroth's champions, of course. I have done that raid. Not when it was current content, but, going back to farm to get those mounts. As I said, you are kind. Kind enough to avoid mentioning that Neltharion's betrayal of his dearest friend was the incident that shattered Malagos' ghost and cost your flight so dearly. I am told they were indeed close. Friends who shared many secrets. Now, sadly, all lost to time. Calic poured himself another glass of arc wine. His voice in the next moment was sure and strong. But you, Rathian, are not Neltharion. If only I could honestly believe that. But hadn't Neltharion become Deathwing? Who would Rathian become? He clinked his glass with Calyx. Nor are you Malagos. It was intended to be a compliment, but Rathian saw Calyx's shoulders slump. The blue dragon laughed sadly. I'm not much of anything anymore. There's barely a blue dragon fight at all now. We should not have disbanded. Not when our numbers were so small. Calic pressed a hand to his chest, then let it fall as he looked out into the night. The Aspects had surrendered Titan-granted powers to finally and utterly destroy Deathwing. They were still dragons, of course, but Aspects now a name alone. The Blues, Rathian knew, had drifted to disconnected places all over the world. Well, Rathian said lightly, trying to shift the mood, though perhaps the effect of the arc wine was bringing out this merrier side to him. Aren't we a fine pair? Two brilliant, handsome young dragons with no flights. I suggest that, since neither of us has any community at all to speak of, if our Aspects could be friends, then surely we can as well. I mean, after all, as the mortals are so fond of pointing out, misery loves company. That got a genuine laugh out of Caligos. You helped slay an old god. Perhaps others will stay well clear of us. But I am curious about something. The last time we spoke, you inquired about the Dragon Isles. I'm sorry I could not be of more assistance. Knowledge of them is as cloaked in secrecy for me as it is for you. Have you discovered anything further? Nothing. Rathian looked to the sky. You were the only one who told me anything of value, that the land's magic had gone dormant for a long time ago. I wasn't even born then. I can't believe that little scrap of information was all you learned. Who else did you speak with? Rathian counted on his fingers. I asked Chromie if she knew where it was, he said, referring to the bronze dragon. She said, yes. Then no. And then admitted she was confused. Ysera is gone. He sobered for a heartbeat, thinking of the absence of the green flight's aspect. And Nozdormu won't even grant me an audience. Nozdormu, leader of the Bronze Flight, was preoccupied maintaining all the infinite time-ways. And Alexstrasza? Calic asked, keeping his voice neutral as he brought up the aspect of the Red Flight. The Reds and Rathian had a rather complicated past, which included trying to kill one another on more than one occasion. Let's also not even bring up the whole Deathwing tried to basically force Alexstrasza and Ysera to basically breed, but let's not bring that up. That's probably a touchy subject with Alexstrasza. He had been so desperate for knowledge that he had swallowed his pride and spoken with the Dragon Queen, who was unexpectedly kind. Even so, she had only sighed and said, "It is a place that is lost to us." Nothing of consequence, was all Rathian said. He sounded and felt despondent. He had for some time, and found it increasingly hard to hide the pain from others. Attending the wedding had only deepened the feeling. He found his hand at his chest, pressing as if to physically soothe the ache. Glancing up, he saw that Calic was doing the same thing. "Calic?" Rathian asked slowly. "Are you in pain?" Calic had been lost in thought and then started, "Oh, no. Well," he amended, "not so much a pain as a sorrow. There have been various times in my life when I felt desolate, alone, that there was something I wanted, needed, but couldn't have. I am experiencing the same sensation," Rathian said, red eyes narrowing, "as if there is a weight on my chest, a feeling in my bones I can't seem to articulate." "Yes, that's it exactly," exclaimed Calic, "and also, as if I am missing a piece of myself that I didn't know I had, but now I yearn for it." They looked at each other for a long moment. Rathian spoke cautiously. "If we are both feeling this sensation, then perhaps other dragons are too," Calic breathed. For the first time in a long time, hope flickered within Rathian, and he was overcome with a desire to meet a certain someone as if summoned. "I hate to humble myself yet again, and I am uncertain if I will find answers. But perhaps we should go to Wormrest and ask Alexstrasza some questions." Rathian quirked an eyebrow. "Let's stop finishing each other's sentences, shall we?" Calic laughed, then moved his hands elegantly, opening a portal. A glimpse at its center revealed a cool, teal and blue-white landscape. "Perfect. I was growing frightfully weary of all this purple." And with that, Rathian stepped through. "It would seem we are not alone in our mysterious malaise, Rathian remarked. "That's an understatement," Calic murmured. They had materialized near the base of Wormrest Temple, finding themselves in the center of the largest gathering of dragons Rathian had ever seen. Some wore their visages, and it did not escape Rathian that many had placed their hands on their chests over their hearts from time to time, waiting for the Dragon Queen to address them. Rathian did not expect to see any of his own flight there, of course. There were plenty of red and bronze dragons, and many greens as well, but he was saddened to spot so few blue dragons in comparison. Calic was right about them being scattered. There's barely a blue dragon flight at all now. Stay here, waiting with the rest of them if you like, Rathian told Calic, but I refuse to squander a single moment here. The troubling sensation was not abating, but rather increasing. Suiting actions to words, Rathian shifted and flew directly to the top of the temple. He was done with waiting to find the Dragon Isles, waiting for the dream to stop tormenting him, waiting to understand what this cursed feeling was and why he feared the unknown. And yet, as he recalled the joy he had witnessed at the wedding, the warmth of loved ones, the power of connection, of belonging, Rathian was terrified that whatever Alexstrasza had to say, it would not be good. That whatever his heart had been seeking would never be his, even if it had a name. Alexstrasza was in her visage, long red hair, almost the same hue as her cloak, gazing at the massive dragons gathered below her. With her was Nosdormu. He was often stoic and difficult for even Rathian to read, which was likely a good thing, considering his powerful knowledge of the past and future, but now he looked pensive. Distant, even. Beside him stood Ysera's daughter, Marithra. Ah, that's her name, Marithra, who had stepped up as the informal head of the Green Dragonflight after the loss of her mother. While Marithra had her hand to her heart, she did not look distressed. Her night elven face instead showed peace? Alexstrasza. This feeling, this loss for words, Rathian thumped his chest. What is happening to us? She turned, and her face, as it had been during his last visit, was soft and alight with joy. Straight to the point. You are ever true to form, Rathian, she said with a gentle mirth. Why, thank you. Alexstrasza stepped forward, and as if there was not and never had been mistrust or resentment between them, gently placed a hand on his face. To his own surprise, he allowed it, comprehending that the significance of this moment transcended any quarrels. Young one, the Dragon Queen said, exchanging a sage look with Nosdormu, you have heard the call, and you have answered. Rathian did not understand. The call? Yes, the call, she said, speaking to all those standing closely around her. One long awaited, all of us, here, below, anywhere in the world, we have all been called, and we have heard it with our hearts. The Dragon Isles are awaiting our return. But, Rathian shook his head, still not comprehending. Rathian, she said softly, you are homesick. The ache, the desperate longing for something he had never had. Homesick? The Dragon Isles had never been denied to him. They were only waiting. For him, and for every other dragon in Azeroth. His people, Rathian... I read that wrong, excuse me. His people. Rathian had not been excluded. He was being welcomed. He belonged. Now that he knew what the hurt in his chest represented, it dissipated, transforming into something close to exultation. And as the Dragon Queen turned to continue in sharing the jubilant revelation with all those gathered below, Rathian, the Black Prince, the dragon without a flight, realized his recurring nightmare also had the power to transform. He saw it now not as a forecast of an inevitable fall to darkness, but as a challenge to be accepted and conquered. All of dragonkind was in this moment. His kin, the dragons gathered below, cheered and applauded at the news as if on cue. Homesick, he mused to himself. But he had a home now, and soon he would have a flight. Rathian thought of the vows exchanged earlier, pledges of undying devotion and care, and he made one now. It would be he, not Deathwing, who would guide his flight to their future. And that was a promise he would keep. And that was The Vow Eternal by Christy Golden. Nice little short story there, us giving getting a glimpse at the wedding between Lorthamar and Thalysra. Really glad we got to actually have a glimpse of that in this, even though I would have liked this to have actually been in the game, but whatever. I guess they were pressed for time or crunch. I'm just saying, an event like this in the game would have been great. I would have loved to have seen this in the game, but whatever, I suppose. At least we got this extra little bit here, so it's also a nice little glimpse into what's been going on with Rathian, which, I've been curious about that for quite some time now, especially when we got him to return in BFA. I was curious, what's going to happen with Rathian? Well, we may have a glimpse. I'm very much looking forward to seeing what is going to happen with the dragons, the dragon flights, the aspects. Are we going to see the blue dragons return and actually see the blue dragon flight remade? Just, are we actually going to see them become aspects again somehow? Yeah, I'm very curious to see what they're going to do here, where they are going with this, to see the developments in the story. And please, for goodness sakes, let's actually have Marithra actually be relevant. We had Ysera in the Shadowlands. I hope they don't bring her back. Let her stay in the Shadowlands, and let's actually develop Marithra as a character. If she's going to now be here as the head of the Dragonflight in her mother's place, let's actually let her be that. Let's actually make her the official head of the Green Dragonflight now, and let's show more of Marithra on camera as a character. That's just my take. I think it would be a bad idea, a mistake for them to just undo that and just bring Orisa back, or bring Ysera back and be like, she's back, nothing happened. It would also undo, the moment of what happened back in Legion, and also what happened in Shadowlands when we brought her back. But anyways, that's a whole different discussion. I'm just saying, let's just move on from Ysera, let her stay in Ardenweald. And let's actually have Marithra now actually, get more relevance and actually get more camera time and actually get, development as a character. Let's find out more about her, Maybe have some interaction with her and Alexstrasza, who I imagine Marithra would see Alexstrasza as her aunt. So maybe she could call her, Auntie Alex or something like that, and maybe get stories about her mother from Alexstrasza, since they were basically sisters. I'm just saying. It could be good stuff. That's all I'm saying. So anyways, that's the Vow Eternal from Christy Golden. And I hope you guys enjoyed my reading of it. And I will see you guys for the launch of Dragonflight. Stay tuned.